Bird Lens Pictures, and I'm Brent Noury, and we're going to continue our audiobook reading of The Flower Maker today. And we're going to try and get right into it because I don't want to have too much talking again before we get into the reading. Makes people have to find where it is in the video. Um, you'll be able to find the first reading of this where we read chapters 1, 1.5, and 2 in the Flower Maker playlist on this channel, Blurred Lens Pictures. And welcome to the channel. Feel free to like and subscribe. And again, we're doing a reading of my novel, The Flower Maker. So we're going to get right into it. And this is chapter 3, A Walk to the Park. Bzzz. It's R.A. again. He answered his phone, stepping out of the store and into the brisk autumn air. Heyo, their customary greeting. Heyo. So we're all set up here. Just food to set out later when we begin. How are you? You haven't started drinking yet, right? No. Oh, and I want to say, I like the flower pattern painting I just hung up. There's really something to that one. She was referring to the large flower collage-esque painting he'd done recently as a gag for the commercial art lover. Bright colors and simple, but lifelike and mildly abstract, barely touching the surreal. The only surrealness was that it was a satire in itself, and the artist perhaps even hated the piece. But in that kitschness, it had started to even grow on him, as some artists can become entranced under their own design and completely miss the monster of Frankenstein. It did use all the rational techniques, opposites in shade, a great subject, possible unseriousness, colors that could steal any room's attention, and yet perfect for any wall, for any house of any time. You should do more of them like that. It's not easy to come up with these floral pattern masterpieces, you know. Well, it looks good, and the colors look really nice. Thank you. You've gotten yourself moving, showered, shaved. Yes, I've got my coffee and moving around in the world. You headed to tennis? Yes, you wouldn't believe how Susan is dressing these days since the divorce. You'd probably like it. Anyway, Mirka has gotten so much better in the last year. We've been hitting a lot. And Marcy will be the fourth. Oh, Marcy. Oh, that's great. Tell her I said hello. How is she doing since things? Well, she's staying busy and keeping the kids busy. And I don't think they know at all yet. But how could you tell them? I think she's doing the right thing with all of this. Yes. Well, anyways, I'll text you about anything, but otherwise, we should be ready. And it was so cute earlier. Gray said he was so excited to see your work today. After the call ended, he had a heavy feeling. He wondered if his niece, Ava Margot, felt the same way. Again, he thought, it's far too early in the day to start drinking and thinking of real worldly things. Marcy's children had lost one of their parents recently, E. He was a close friend of the artist. They had won a tennis tournament, a local club event, the week of his passing. He hadn't seen the signs, though. Maybe he had. R.A. had filled him in on some of the details, as scattered as they were. Something about divorce and alcohol abuse. But E was so nice and friendly and made points that made sense, not just to be contrarian, but to give benefit of the doubt. The artist had learned something from E, that other people sometimes have to do things their way. It was something he already knew, but somehow E made sense of it. After all, the artist had the wrong impression of E at first, like maybe he was hiding something. But on that sign, again, the artist had ended up being right. What was a miracle? Sometimes he would ask himself. What could be categorized that way? He had seen miracles, but they weren't exactly good, per se. To see something coming together through technology and media, enterprise, such as a world event happening now, like walking into the main office of school in the first week of the first semester with plans to change a few of the scheduled classes, and finding the news on the TVs in the room, and the reporters speculating that maybe it was a helicopter or a small plane that had struck the North Tower, and then his eyes fixated on the screen, seeing a glint at first, in a moment that even at first sight felt in slow motion. Then this sudden and utter realization of what was about to happen. And at the same time, you both knew exactly what was happening and were perplexed by the entire awe of the tragic occurrence. We were all bound then to live through this. That was way back when he was in love with his first blonde with blue eyes. She looked a bit like Cameron Diaz, and so he was in love with her, too. Strange enough, his first two crushes had been brunettes, Jay and Crystal, and the Pink Ranger and Kelly from Saved by the Bell. Two from school and two imagined. Neither had taken much interest. And still, if he really thought further back to his first crush on the playground, her name escapes. And it was the same confusion of maybe she liked another guy. But she was a blonde, and he remembered her now only as an angelic appearance. It's what he thought then, too. They had kissed on the swings. He remembers the sand under his feet. And it was a sort of, I wonder what this will be like moment, as the two 5-year-olds tried out the most elusive concept known to exist. It was the thing of fairy tales are made of, and can't be repeated again in life. Some things would be one time only. By now, he was walking by the park, just across from Dr. Sosa's. The interesting piece of green nature surrounded by concrete. This was the only place to find butterflies, he thought, as one fluttered past, and he hoped it knew to stay there for the sake of its children. He couldn't really see the park from his apartment. The two big east and south windows sadly left a corner of walls where the park view might be. But from the porch just outside the kitchen, dining, living room, he did have a great view of the trees and grass that were not cleverly plotted along, dispersed amongst sidewalks as if to add decor to the hardness and coldness of cities. Still, he thought, had there been no city, a place to bring together ideas, security, and laws, the park would be empty of people, and they would be fending for themselves. And then the majesty of the way figures playing in the park seemed to be illuminating a pureness of mankind's dream would evaporate into the thin air of how things could be. There was something about the way people remembered days from their past on an occasion of some meaning. The little child of second year's walk tripped, chasing his ball, and mother was there to gather him back up and set him on his way again, as others in the park were doing their things, while enjoying the perfect blue of the morning sky. The child fell down again, up again, and running. The artist had always been thankful for the grass, in some abstract way. You could refer to Whitman to tell you what it might mean. The mother and tiny one were now rolling in the green of it, and now they were up and off on their way. How many times would such a thing as simple as that happen again for the mother and child? Life's pure splendor. A good life should be made of these, as to not have to dig into the well of memory too often. A sickness lies in there, to be sad about the beautiful things. One had to learn to let the sadness go and let moments happen with appreciation. He had a hard enough time doing this himself, in fact. It didn't really seem possible to sustain such nirvana in life. Only once things were forever still would they truly be perfect again. Death's fingertips held the doorway open. But that was an idea in itself, too, a creation of man, a label for the unknown. How in the stillness and rest could there be such movement as heaven and hell must produce? No, it was a before-born type of thing, where the body and mind doesn't exist, and only the spirit to move in and out while of mortal flesh, the spirit seeking to release itself, and the body and mind set to work, as a machine might, or a slave, for the master's will. The spirit which is not visible except through things it inhabits, pointing to its home, beyond the pale of imagination for working minds. The spirit plays a tune, sung for the muse. Mother are the words, if you could transcribe them, in all languages, in all worlds, in all infinity. Self-pity and arrogance can be a terrible combination, and he had been deemed both by multiple people in his life. And deep down, no matter how he tried to pull at the roots, he knew some part of it must be true. He had gotten in trouble at a young adult age, just coming of age, 16, for stealing things, when in fact he had set up an entire black market of streetwear and cashmere sweaters and leather jackets, and he orchestrated the traffic of the sales of the marked-down goods to the known local weed dealers, and hence created bidding war for the best goods, and free dinners and Hennessy and constant blunts. It was a live fast, hopefully don't get caught type of thing, where they would even go around in the leather jackets as a gang, calling themselves the Mini Greek Mafia. And of course, he did get caught, quite literally the day after his father warned him on the phone. Everyone gets caught. His father knew he was up to something with the leather jackets. He was sent off to a placement. This is where he learned the word arrogant. It was the staff's description of him. Hey, everyone in the chat. That's end of chapter 3 of The Flower Maker. Welcome to the chat, everyone, and to the channel, Blurred Lens Pictures. We're doing a reading of The Flower Maker. I'm Brent Noury. Appreciate y'all for liking and subscribing and staying tuned. This is a whole series that I have on my channel, if you check it out. And we're on to chapter 4, In the Park. Bzzz. A bee zipped past his ear as he was now sitting on a bench in the park with a less than half full cup of coffee, and the thought raged in, as if to take over all others. And then, with perseverance, he pushed the dreaded thought away. He had promised R.A. he wouldn't do it too early. He chose to think about the bee, and he thought, if I am to write something about a beekeeper, I suppose I'll need to know something of it. He knew of the minutiae and tedious work of some authors, and their painstaking explanations, which undoubtedly were transforming at times, but could lead to such boredom as to say, this white whale ain't worth it. And what is good to an audience anyways of readers? Well, he thought, I have my aesthetics, and the story must move along to some of the important parts. There'll be enough bee talk for the beehive mind, though the beehive mind is not much of a hive, I assume. The important part was the greenhouse and the special flower growing within. What was a flower maker, after all? He still didn't know the meaning of it. Was a discovery he was on to. Would it be ridiculous for an author to put it into his book that he didn't really know where he was going, other than the end. And there was a monster growing in the middle, and the flower maker might be real, but he didn't know who or what it was, other than maybe it was a touch of the thing he searched for, a glimpse of perfection. It, too, would fade with the things brought to earth. But inside the story, he could sense love. The muse had told him that love was a passageway, and love had two doors, belief and truth. But belief and truth were siblings that love appointed to guard the way in. My muse sets a maze for me. She trusts me to find the way through the labyrinth. I wander cloaked in art. There is no yarn as a writer of stories I cannot find. As elusive as the flower maker may have seemed, the idea was now set, and it could not be forgotten. To rush is to bring pretentious things into it. To slow down too much breeds self-indulgence. Oh, to make one happy, useless in art. Even a patron will wish their purchased, personally designed piece was a bit more like that one. Which one? Over there, the other one. Oh, more like R.A. had said. He could do that sort of thing on command, make commercial-looking art. Why don't you do it then and make some money, R.A. would say. Then you can do all the other things. R.A. was practical, after all. Get a good career and have good credit and have health care. His mother had a very odd take on health care. She didn't think people should have it unless they worked for it. She had always worked for it. And it was a sense of pride or something that someone else should so easily get the thing she worked for. In his mind, it was an insane thing to work for health. And his mother's idea seemed to be the prevailing theory amongst the elites. As crazy as it was, he thought, Soylent Green was happening before our eyes, and everyone knew it. It was bureaucracy, or it was you don't understand, or it was you don't have enough money to be here. You don't know what pictures or videos are, and let me explain why we had to do this thing that last week we denied having happened. Let me tweet about the Nobel Prize winning capitalist who goes against the radical socialists, while my good buddy next door kidnaps and sexually abuses a young Swedish genius that should be winning said award. So much of Pandora's box was loose, but hope was lurking in the Dickinsons and the flotilla on the sea. I guess it takes so much these days. Or are we more aware? This was the major test that time had been gathering. He loved her, he thought. He always had in some way. She was such a light in darkness, like his muse. She was the saint. Greta forever, he thought. I would die for you. I was worried for you. And I would have stormed Troy for you. There had been another major incident lately, or a bunch, if you count Gaza. 2 years and counting of being aware, and the pictures keep coming on the phone, and you shouldn't look away. You have to be brave enough for that, he would tell himself. But the president had supposedly been almost killed twice, and the Democratic Party was in shambles with the streets overrun with the neo-brown shirts. There was a hybrid Nazi Stasi in every pickup truck or around every corner, looking for you. You were one of them. The bad guys. A terrorist. You might even write something they wouldn't allow in their schools. We had all just witnessed the event, on our phones this time. It was being compared to Kennedy or even Pearl Harbor. In fact, it was being compared to Christ himself, on the cross. It seemed a bit over the top for a hunting accident which occurred between groups of friends just playing war games. He should be like Dr. Caligari, running the asylum, an Edgar Allan Poe character, hiding a secret, his mad project of science finally connecting with God. And his greenhouse is placed in the courtyard, a circle-like courtyard in the center of a stone building, a Dracula's lair. And the castle belongs to a woman who was once a princess of sorts, of some heritage, and the scientists had tricked her into a trance like Svengali. The beekeeper had worked with queens before, and he was the king of hearts. The scientist wanted to make a special honey from his flower, and so he put a hive near the greenhouse in hopes of extracting an ambrosia from the nectar. This would be part of his covenant between nature and the spiritual realm. But there was something wrong with the bees. They were diseased, and they weren't making any honey. So the scientist called the beekeeper to come replace the bees. There's really only one deadline in life. All the others are merely manufactured. To sell ad space or to comfort someone else's demands. People are expecting all the news at once, or are they focused on the things they're interested in? Or is it the way you attract their attention? Are people interested in the tidbits or just the broad strokes? Is there a way you can combine everything without it looking a mess? Like a flower in a greenhouse that has all the best traits of the most recognized flowers. How unfair for a flower to be thought of as less than others, and not of its use by humans. Like the differing trees, lots of flowers gain their fame from occasions, simply spectacle, which would gather meaning and significance. I suppose a bride remembers her bouquet quite well, depending on how many she's had. And roses being a rose. Perhaps that bees find differing flowers quite useful, as we of different planks of wood. The beekeeper would know the details and explain to the scientist what flowers were preferred. Boring, he thought. How am I to construct a flower from lavender, sunflowers, bee balm, and borage? What a hideous fruit of labor that would be. He started to think playing God wasn't going to be that easy. He would have to find either a particular bee of good taste or design our own bee. As the artist read through a list on his phone, aster, coneflowers, foxglove, goldenrod, cosmos, echinacea, yarrow, anise hyssop, calendula, chives, daisies, sweet Joe pieweed, salvia, snapdragons, zinnias, blazing star. He realized the obviousness of his actions. Maybe he was the mad scientist searching for his perfect flower. The thought had occurred to him that he was part of his ideas, and they were him. And that only made sense to him because that's how he saw the whole world, or, existentially theoretically thinking, how he saw his connection to everything. Like a photon of light, there were no pins. You would simply put your hat up, and a pin would appear. End of chapter 4. Hey folks, everyone in there, lady, man reviews, tips and tricks. Hello, thanks for joining. This is the flower maker. We're continuing on. I might need to light a cigarette right now real quick before we get into chapter 5. Appreciate y'all tuning in. We're doing a full reading of the new novel right now. I'm Brent Noury, this Blurred Lens Pictures. Feel free to like and subscribe if you do like it. and want to subscribe. There's a whole playlist for this on my channel here. Hang on one second. We'll continue with the reading in just 1 second. Just want to say hi to everyone that's showing up. It's been fun doing this sort of journal along with it. I have a whole full journal of reading The Flower Maker, and this is more of a trying to get the whole audiobook down in like maybe 2 or 3 sessions. I'm probably about 50 pages in right now. Again, this is The Flower Maker by me, Brent Noury. And we're up to chapter 5. Drink of the Gods. The doors slid open to the liquor store, conveniently just a block from the park. The artist checked his phone to make sure he was in the safe zone. 11 a.m. He had promised her it wouldn't be too early. And since 10:30 had become his new normal lateness of first sip, 11 seemed like quite a long wait. He wouldn't be having many anyways, just 3 shots of Jim Beam, sipped over perhaps even up to 3 hours. That wasn't that bad. And he wouldn't have any more till later at the show, and on other days, maybe no more. But he knew it was bad, to wake up and within 3 hours need medicine to carry on. Even if he only had 2 or 3 beers later, he knew this was every day. And how could he ask his body to be anything other than the poison he put in it? He had stopped drinking routinely and even smoking weed for a bit, finally about to have it together again after RA and the annus horribilis. He had a booth at an art fair, and she emerged like a human embodiment of the muse herself. She bought the 2 best paintings he'd ever done. He wanted to give them to her, but she insisted on paying. She could instantly tell when a man was attracted to her, as most were. While they dated, they would often recall this meeting as a way to reignite the initial fire, each character in a way needing to be their own growing character. She deserved better, he thought. He hoped to be that. He'd heard those 2 words again, arrogant and self-pitying. Now there was another phrase to add to the phrase pile. Lack of ambition. But what did that mean exactly? Ambition of what? Selling paintings? Starting a business? Getting a career? He thought of ambition as something else. Personal. But it wasn't really that. The difference between having a life and a family is about $10,000. Between making $30,000 and say $45,000. Excuse me. The difference between having a life and a family is about $10,000 to $15,000. Between making $30,000 and $45,000. This was a generalization, he believed, and it was hurting the country. Everything costs something, everywhere, and everyone was growing tired. They had parted ways and stayed friends, though not as close as him and R.A. She became a yoga instructor, and he was proud of her. And he heard through the grapevine that she had officially changed her name to Flower. And when they spoke on occasion through social media, she would gladly and proudly tell him how his paintings were still hung up in her walls. He had moved into the apartment after that breakup. He liked the views and the stone chapel next door. He knew nothing of the cockroaches and bedbugs. It was perhaps more penetrating of a pain to the core of failure, almost the entire annus horribilis at once, but he knew that not to be true. No one could replace his sister and father and best friend. Maybe someone could replace R.A., he still hoped. He hadn't walked in the pond with the stones in pocket as he had thought he might do just for relief in the week after the loss of Flower. He knew it would pass, and the muse would return. So he turned to the things that had gotten him through the Horribilis. He had learned guitar, and that was still with him. He had written poems and painted and drank. His muse seemed to be mocking him like a deranged misinterpretation of Keats' Nightingale. But she was evermore. Then, within the calls, the rhythm returned, and her wings, like seraphim, pointed in all directions at a man on top of a hill who regularly come down and preach of higher things. No, not Socrates again, or Jesus, or Moses, but Zarathustra lit a new way of eternal return. And so St. Helen's was the top of his head, and a beam of light shined of divine things into the mind as bright as Achilles' new armor. And barely was he aware of what soon he might think. And in the months to follow, the scheme would begin, maybe not even of his own making. The art was taking on a life of its own, almost as if written or made by somebody else. He would watch it grow. He took the final sip of his first nipper of honey whiskey. Honey, he thought. Was it all connected? Yes, it must be. This was his life-changing ambrosia of the scientist in his story. Though the nectar from the flower, as well as the mere sight of it, should give the taster or viewer a hallucinogenic experience, such was its awe. Hence the scientist's special goggles he would wear around, strapped to his forehead whenever not needed. The bees were having a problem connecting with the flower of the first breeded batch, and enhancements had to be made. The beekeeper had only seen the outside of the greenhouse, and had only dealt with the dying bees. He questioned whether what he was doing for the scientists was morally right. He was supposed to save bees, but he had an utter fascination with the possible honey and flower inside. Not so much the greenhouse, but the mansion. He had seen her through the window on a couple of occasions. Actually, she had made an appearance on every one of his visits. It was a land deed, he thought, as he finished his second nipper. He had returned to the park to think on his flower maker and that other book, the big one, and all it entails. Set into his second drink mind. He liked, of course, the way it mellowed the thing, the drinks, and not the big book. That only made things stranger. Though, as he would drink, his ideas would get stranger too, as all people's must, he would tell himself. Yes, a land deed, to anyone that asked. Clearly, psychological manipulation. The history of the book was much different than the way people talked about it. It was strange to him that the first person there was any scientific evidence of existing was the man whose family and bloodline was given the land by a secret relationship with God. The very land the entire book was about, no less. And he had killed a giant with a slingshot. And the giant represented the dirty monsters of the other people who lived on the land too. And he was a poet, connected with God too, like himself. And so they were brothers, and he would have to kill for the throne. But what of other gods? And he thought of her, the girl at the other gas station. He thought for weeks she was maybe Indian, like real India, Hindu, and she smiled a certain way. She was learning English, and he only wished to know another language. Too long a story to digress on. She had a Bollywood face, as in to say that of a star. It was a good feeling to see her face when she would be there. He didn't know her name. She had done a peculiar thing the other day when he had purchased a pack of cigarettes. She twisted and flicked her wrist where the top of her hand was facing down, and he recognized the gesture of some sort. They rarely met eyes, but when they did, it was the old thing from young. And so they did this time. She told him simply it meant thank you, and he thought he stared too long into her eyes. He had given himself up, and he thought she noticed this, even perhaps noticed himself noticing it. He had gone home to study the particular gesture she had shown him, and he couldn't find it anywhere online. Simply the namaste greeting of putting one's palms together like in prayer. And he thought maybe he had confused the entire thing in translation. And she hadn't been there the last couple of days for him to maybe bring the subject of the gesture up. But in that time, he had derived a nickname for her. Until he knew her real name, he would call her Lakshmi, for he felt that's what her spirit might be, and he was an avatar of Vishnu. And he started to think on a life with her. He allowed himself this much fantasy. What a different life it could be. They had come from completely different upbringings, and still somehow he thought it could be as a Benjamin Buttons meeting in the middle, though he knew it could never be, and therefore it couldn't be. But maybe she was an avatar too, like a Mitravinda, and she could choose who she wants to marry for love. He thought of the idea that all of the gods were convening and mapping out territory in his plans. And mapping out territory in his plans. They liked the idea of his flower. They could claim it as their own. And he had no defense over that, for he owed it to them, and he was grateful for the gifts, though in the dark hours he rued their torment. They don't understand a mortal body. Do the gods feel pain? Do ideas feel pain? You could start with one bubble, and before you knew it, was a boiling pot. But you might be in one bubble surrounded by others as a simulacrum, unaware of the pot, or the flame, or the switch, or the hand, or the hunger. And you could journal on journals themselves as critics do. And you could be lost in something such as a moment and ponder it into its fractals. And you could try to perfect it, reconstruct it back in the perfect place, where it all lasts forever, where the people you meet are there, as they are perfect representations of themselves. Was that the key to heaven, or the idea of how it could look, where the perfect things of infinite slices were just that, perfect and infinite? What a task to be God's eyes, all of us, some way giving it a taste of the view. Its rules are its and ours if we are of it, which it seems to be. He had given up formal religion years ago due to the perversion of Christ's message, but somehow, through rethinking and traveling the world's ideas, it was returning, the truly spiritual. And it was through science, the science of things, the search for answers with the pessimistic, skeptical mind, or a hero's journey. But those things, in a sense, had also passed. He was on a divine mission through art to release something special, the most beautiful flower. His mind couldn't get off it now, this idea of the flower maker. It was sustaining his day and concentration of thought to some degree. He wanted to know how they would reach the end he had in mind. All right, folks, that's end of chapter 5, and we're going to probably cut the reading right there for now, as my phone is starting to lose its battery. Let me try and fix that real quick, actually. Appreciate everyone tuning in. I mean, I would like to do another big chunk. How much have we done here? 41 minutes? Yeah, let's keep going with it. We're going to keep going. All right, so we're in chapter 6, the Annus Horribilis. It was a dragonfly this time. Jade. He thought of his sister, as he always did when seeing a dragonfly or a butterfly. He insisted without a surety that it was a butterfly tattoo Jade had on her shoulder, and his mother would say no, it was a dragonfly. Half the time he thought his mother might be right about that. Jade had died in the Annus Horribilis, a year that always sat on the stovetop of his cognition. It would always be there. Now, 10 years since, he had learned to live with it, and he had learned from it. He would never again underappreciate things he loved or moments that came along. And the Horribilis had given rise to his re-life with art. He had only painted twice, 2 paintings, while with R.A. And in the year of horrible things, he would immerse himself in painting, music, and history. He would teach himself guitar and wake up at 7 a.m. and drink a glass of rum of low shelf into a dizzying daily disorder. Hurt was his enemy, and the enemy to his enemy was loving pain. He had returned to thinking about oppressors, empires, and republics. He had thought America was like a drunk guy at a party that pulls out a machine gun and starts waving it around at everyone, demanding that they like him and also his ideas. The party was the world. But nothing was as simple as an image or meme. History was an Escher staircase. You'd have to look close to see what's going on, and then pull back to see the full illusion. All the empires came to be in the same way, and they would all fall the same way. And republics seemed doomed from the start, ignoring the entire obviousness of the truth. There's a whole other world out there. Maybe it's primal wishes, this republic thing. We can all be the same as citizens in our land of sameness. Republics will always wish their empires had stayed that way, the good old days when we knew who we were. With empires, we must be concerned with us becoming them and them being us, and the gathering of elites to extract from everyone's lives. If he didn't stop and think about things, pages could be missing, lost pages in the wind, and maybe he could come back to it if forgotten. But that would be something of a second draft and not the rendered original. What if first impressions were right, but not always, and hence the need for a second draft, to review what we're up to, but like a curator deciding to clean up a grand masterpiece by Da Vinci, something could be lost in that cleaning up, like hundreds of years of history and viewings. But when should art be nurtured by its inheritors, At what point would the artist want his rotting piece to be saved, perhaps changed, and now ambiguous to its initial purpose? Sure, we should have something in dire we should excuse me. Sure, we should save something in dire straits, as to not lose it to the wind, and the Horribilis had been a type of first draft of things to come. It was its own organism of sorts, and it kept growing throughout the year, to the point where, by the end of it, the artist believed himself cursed and that God was conspiring against him. It started with the unexpected death of his father. There had been some mystery to it, as in, the coroner declared it a heart attack, though he had fallen and hit his face on the floor of the kitchen. Blood had poured through the floor and down to the basement where his father had been bringing up laundry. His father was on blood thinning medication and had suffered a previous drunken laceration that almost made him bleed out on the porch from simply jamming his shin on the step. The artist thought perhaps he had fallen, hit his nose, and bled until heart attack. He would never know, and by the end of the year his sister would be found not more than 3 feet from where their father perished. They had looked the same, people had said, he like his father, and he like his sister. Halfway in between the deaths, R.A. had finally left, though she consoled him and was actually with him when he heard the news of his sister. R.A. had been the one to call him at work about his father. A life has many parts, but he felt he could break his up into before R.A., with R.A., after R.A. She was a bit of a vortex in the middle, where things in the beginning pointed towards and everything after pointed away. And he had grown to be okay with this because R.A. was happy, and they really weren't quite made for each other, despite the easy conversation between the two, which he attributed to her nature. They butted heads on some important things. She hadn't wanted kids, and he did. But by the end, he had bought into her concept, and she into his. And she no longer thought of him as someone to be a good father, or the father of her kids, which was a new thing for her in her approach to 40 years old. Not that she thought he would be a bad father, in fact, the opposite. But she didn't see him as a father, still too much a child, and his daily caring for his dementia-ridden grandmother after the loss of his father pulled them apart. The Horribilis would take on a freight train-style crash and destruction after the breakup. Then came the death of Jade, then the father of Jade's child, then his best friend from school, then his cat. Then the government came in with social services and told him he couldn't care for his grandmother properly. So they kidnapped her and put her in a home to die a couple months later, which he had declared to the judge in court would happen if she was taken. He was throwing up blood in the morning and got a crick in his neck that never went away. Old age was setting in quick, and the blond hairs in his beard mixed among the dark had shifted to silver white almost overnight. The world was not the place he'd thought. The world was not the place he'd thought of years ago. There was only one place that felt real to him, the engaging in one's art. And, as if a light had switched, lectures on all subjects were now deliciously interesting to him. Who knows when Minerva will arrive like the edge of the muse's blade? She waits and bides her time. Then she swoops in, with whispers in your ear, little drips of confidence, a savior of heroes. You never see her, this sister to Gabriel. She happens between the space of change, and before you know it, someone has won or lost. She finally arrived with the first sighting of perhaps the end of the Horribilis. A friend of the artist suffered a heart attack, and this time survived. Though it was another sign of the new wicked world he was in, the fact his friend had made it through gave him a measure of that elusive thing with wings, hope. The tunnel had light, and the walls were painted with his most surreal touches. An endless Sistine Chapel behind him and around him. Ahead was unknown, but there would be something that he couldn't quite see. But it was bright. He knew nothing yet of the greenhouse and the flower within. That's the end of chapter 6, and we're going to end it right there. Thank you, folks, for tuning in. Appreciate y'all. You got another little, basically 50-minute video here. Probably try and do the whole rest of it in the next reading. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll see you tomorrow.